The first session today is community network models and best practices. So I will be your moderator for the first session. Now, there are several community network models that exist around the world, and obviously the Asia Pacific is no different. What we will do in this session is look into some of these different models and hear from people who are actually out there in the field deploying and running community networks. The idea is that, let's hear what their learnings are and what we can take away to see what else we can do by using community networks to connect the hardest to connect. I have asked my panelists to have very short interventions because we want to keep this short, dynamic, and moving along at a good pace. So I'm hoping that no one will start making long speeches out of this today, and that includes myself. I will not make any long speeches, I promise. And then, of course, we'll have a short break where we will look at some further stories from the community around the world. And then we'll move on to the next session. We do hope that you will stay tuned in for the second session today as well, which is also a very interesting topic, looking at how we can continue to democratize using community networks and the internet. So let me very quickly introduce our speakers. I will not read out their bios. If you want to know more about them, please visit our website, CNXAPAC.org, where we have further details on each person speaking today. So my speakers are, in no particular order, Ritu Srivastava from India. She's been working for several years on access policies. And as well, she's been part of the projects that we've been involved with, which we call Wireless for Communities, over several years now. And we've been building and deploying community networks in well over 100, about 150 odd locations around India. I have Gustav Iskander from Indonesia. He's the director of Common Room and co-founder of Bandung Center for New Media Arts. Gustav has done some really interesting work with indigenous communities in particular, as well as creating spaces for people to be creative. So we look forward to seeing what his learnings are. I have Senthil Kumar from India as well. He largely works in South India and is the co-founder and CEO of Geomio Informatics. He's been doing a lot of work building technology to connect rural areas. So even though he is from the private sector, I think he has some very interesting experiences to share on what they have been doing to connect people in rural areas. Last but not least, I have Peter Bloom from Mexico. He's the founder of Rhizomatica. Unfortunately, Peter could not join us for the live panel discussion. As you can imagine, it's very early in the morning in Mexico. But what he's kindly agreed to do for us is to do a short interview with us. And we'll play that at the end of the session so you can hear some of his experiences on what Rhizomatica has been doing and their learnings. So without further ado, let's get into things. I'll first bring in Gustav into the conversation. Gustav, as I mentioned in the very brief bio that I did about you, that you've been doing some really interesting work in indigenous communities, but as well setting up creative spaces. So could you perhaps share some of the things you've been doing and perhaps also emphasize a little bit on how do you think they've made a difference in the communities that you work? So, Gustav,
thank you, Raj, and thank you, all friends at the EAF for the opportunity. I think I would be delighted to share some of our experience, our activities in regards to the utilizations of internet and digital media. Was started, I think, in around 2000 when we established Bandung Center for New Media Arts in Bandung in West Java. At that time, our focus is mostly to encourage the development of multidisciplinary artistic practice that are based on the internet and the digital media platform, since the internet and digital media is perhaps during that time is new for everybody, not only for us in Bandung in West Java, but I think in global level. So from there, we work a lot with local community in Bandung, which have relatively strongly embedded to this urban culture with this new and emerging creative practice after the political turmoil that happens in Indonesia back in 1998. So I have to say that the internet is somehow having a very important role in pushing forward the democratic transition in Indonesia, which before 98 we have under military regime, and with the people power and the internet and digital media, I think back at the time during the student movement in 98, in which I was also actively engaged, we use internet to disseminate ideas about democratic society. So actually, from there, our interest to use the internet and digital media as a platform to empower people is started to grow. And I think our work with the indigenous community of Kasukuan Ciptagelar was started in around 2013. It was actually under serendipity because at that time we got a commission project led by the Agency for Development in West Java to collect some data and involved in the research for policy making process around ecotourism and creative economy. So we conducting research in around 16 regencies, and Ciptagelar indigenous community is one of the particular area that we are visiting and taking part in our research project. And at that time we are quite surprised because the indigenous community, the Kasepuan Ciptagelar indigenous community is known for its paddy culture and cultivation, in which very traditional, but the chief leader is acknowledged. He even established it time. But when we visit the village back in 2013, the internet connectivity is not well established yet, even though there are some telecom providers that is already operating in the area. So starting from 2014, we discussed a lot with the chief leader and also some elders representative about the possibilities in setting up local internet infrastructure. So after that, actually in 2015, the realizations of that ideas is started to crystallize. So we facilitate the multi-stakeholder meeting in 2016, inviting some colleague from the Ministry of Communication, the Ministry of Planning and Development agencies, as well as some friends who are actively engaged with the internet activism like ICT Watch and Relawan TIK. And we formulate some kind of recommendation at that time, and one particular recommendation is to set up a local internet infrastructure in order to enhance the communication platform in the village. But at that time, the option for the affordable technology is not as widely available as today. So together with, actually we also consulting our interest to Ono Purbo, who are also well known as a founding father of community network movement in Indonesia, who are also involved in Spectrum Liberation movement back in around 2000. At that time, actually, our initial plan is to try out the open BTS technology, but since the technology is quite expensive, not only in terms of money, but also resources, it needs certain technicians and technicalities. So Ono Purbo actually recommend us to use radio frequency, which is more affordable and in terms of technicality is more easy to learn. So from there, step by step, we started to work on the local internet infrastructure until we met Awinet, who do an experimentation in setting up local internet infrastructure back in 2018. And then after that, together with APC in 2019, we started to expand the local community network project and deploy the local internet infrastructure. We're starting with 5 villages using 5.8 frequency for point-to-point to access the internet gateways, and then using 2.4 gigahertz frequency to connect from the backhaul tower to the end user. And from this 5 village, it expands to 10 village, and now the local internet infrastructure is already reached around 29 villages, with daily user on average is around 900 until 1,000 users. And since we also have an experience where our government trying to facilitate internet connectivity for rural areas, which is basically using public money and some subsidies. But from our experience, to use public monies and subsidies is a bit risky, since when they cut down the public funding, the internet connectivity is somehow are also gone. So from there, we learned that we need to.
Gustav, just a question on that. So what, with all the networks you've deployed, how have you funded them? Where did the money come to do the initial setup?
The startup, the seed funding came from APC back in 2019. So from there, we work together with the local community, trying to draw up the business model together with Awinet. And then in the end, we find out that the best option at the moment is by using the internet voucher. So the user in the village can make some adjustment how long and how much internet connections they need for their daily use. And we are very happy that the business model is somehow running. But we also learned that out of the technicality on the local internet infrastructure, to make sure that the business model is running well, we also need to back up with administration and financial services. So up until now, I think on average every month we can collect money at around $2,000. So we can pay out the bandwidth, we can allocate money for maintenance on local infrastructure, also saving some money if there are some troubleshoot happening, like what happened last week when one of our backhaul tower got hit by the lightning. We don't have to rely on funding support anymore. We have some money that we already saved, so we can replace the devices and then back online again. But of course, this kind of approach is can be different in other areas. That is why currently we also trying to expand our project to other place in Cilacap, in certain part of West Java, where we work with local community together with the ICT volunteer in Cilacap region, because here in Ciptagelar, as you probably notice, we are under authorizations of indigenous community who have customary institutions. So like for example, to build a backhaul tower and everything, it is under it is being navigated and regulated by the customary institutions. But outside of the indigenous community, if we want to make a backhaul tower, for example, we need to check any local regulation and local legal framework to do that. So this is like an iteration and a prototype that we are trying to do to find a different models and various approach on how we can establish local internet infrastructure that are built and utilized by the local community.
Okay, so you ended up making a long speech, Gustav. So I'm
sorry for that.
Okay, so you mentioned a whole bunch of things. That's why I actually didn't stop you, because you ended up covering a lot of the things that we were going to cover. So it's good that we have the full roundabout view of what you've been doing there. So maybe this is a good point for me to bring in Ritu. Ritu, you've been involved in a whole bunch of networks, in fact, in other regions as well, in Africa as well. One of the questions that does arise, so Gustav obviously mentioned about 5 gig and 2.4 gig equipment. What have you been seeing as to what people are deploying? And does that still remain the equipment of choice? Because there have been some experiments, for example, with TV white space as well, and equipment around that. And of course, some people have also been playing around with licensed spectrum, which of course has its own set of issues with licensing fees and all that. So Ritu, maybe some quick thoughts from you on, what are you seeing any other different technology models out there, or does Wi-Fi basically dominate?
Thanks, Rajneesh, and thanks everyone for inviting me to CNX. Certainly, Rajneesh, that I have seen a bunch of other technologies which are coming around. Yes, primarily wireless technology and unlicensed spectrum 2.4 and 5.8 gigahertz dominate in that particular domain. However, I have also seen GSMA based network, TV white space model, and depending upon the community need, the choice of offline network to the online network, that is also the demand of the community network as well. Whether we really want to have a network, if the backhaul is not there, what should we do, how do we communicate? Then the offline base of a network is a communication is also implies that there's a requirement on that. uh, in due course of a CNX, we will see different kind of a models, but some of the models which I am specifically interested into, that's a online offline to online model by Janasu, as well as the low cost multi radio routers developed by multi radio routers, which are not only providing the connectivity but also the local server, and it also works on the electric pole or something like that. So those are the some things that which I am interested as well. Another
So
thing, yes,
how about the cost implications, though, Ritu? Because obviously, licensed spectrum, I would imagine, would cost more. And some of this, one of the great things about Wi-Fi, I suppose, is because it's so readily available. It's in mass production, basically. That's why the costs have come down, apart from a few other reasons, obviously. Um, how feasible it is from a financial perspective to use some of these alternative technologies?
so some of these technologies are also viable in terms of when there's no then when there's no connectivity, the GSMA based technology works more viable in the rural areas. And the model of offline to online, it depends, is a viable model. If any community does not have a backhaul, and does not have a backhaul, they still they can communicate through the offline local server. That's something which is evolving around the financial portion. Using different sort of technologies and different permutation combination has allowed different community network operators to play into different segments actually. uh, wh- Using a TV white space is another sort of a, with the permutation combination of a 2.4 or 5.8, is another way of looking into that aspect. uh, as of now, like I have gone to Uganda and I have seen that there are another kind of a technology they are using, not only the Wi-Fi wireless mesh technology, but also using a lot of community radio broadcasting. And since they have a licensing processes in their OTT platforms, what else they can use? So for them, wireless becomes a more easily and viable model for them. So those are the some of the permutation combination which I have seen across the globe they are using it. For
Okay,
instance, yeah, please.
thanks for the Ritu. I just see Senthil has joined us. So Senthil had been at another conference. So thank you, Senthil, for joining in. And this is probably a good time to bring you in, Senthil, because we'll be talking about the various technology options that are there. And I know that your company has been working to connect rural areas with some of your own developed technology, for instance. So maybe do you want to tell us a little bit about what you've been doing there, but as well, how does it compare to, for example, Wi-Fi equipment, and why would you choose one over the other? And please, short interventions. We only got 7 minutes left for this session, so we need to be quick.
So thank you so much, DF, for giving this opportunity. I think this is my 4th year in CNX. Very happy to be continuously participating this forum. Basically, I run a company called GeoMio Informatics. So initially, our idea is how we can provide a digital healthcare to the tribal and rural villages. So we have developed a devices to monitor the pregnant mother, and we have a software everything. But the bigger challenge we faced in the region is a connectivity, because our whole idea is we can digitally monitor the health parameter and send to the doctor, so the doctor can sit anywhere in the world, still could able to give a better consulting for the pregnant mother. So initially when we designed the product, we understand there won't be any connectivity in the region. So what we have done is we made application in an offline mode, like the health worker will go to the pregnant mother home, collect all the vitals and symptom in the app, and come to the connected region, which can be a PHC or like a connected region in the village, and press the sync button in the application. So it will send the data to the cloud. So this is a model we built, but most of the health worker, we never get the data, and we ask them, have you really went to their home? And they will show in their phone, I have everything, I went and I collected data, but I don't know why it is not coming to you. So, and we ask the process, what you follow, how you collect. And what she do is she collect all this data. Once her checkup is done, she switch off the data. She don't press the sync button. So he directly come to the PHC and put the tablet and go for his home. So this is the pattern she follows. So one thing we understand that, if we put any responsibility to the health worker to sync some button or something, they may not able to do this. So we need to get the data in a real time, in their home, we need to get the data. So now our objective is how we can provide a village level connectivity in a public location, so that we could able to collect this data. So I started procuring hardwares, especially TP-Link or Cisco, all this hardware. When we try to use this hardware, the biggest challenge is if any network issue happen, okay, so I have to again come to that village to fix that network issue. Okay, even though we have talked to a lot of local ISP, and every ISP told the same reason, here we can deploy internet services in the region, but the big challenge is there can be a connectivity issue or some problem in the router or something. We need to send the resources from our main office to the villages. So the travel time and then expenses and total maintenance cost, they never get a return on investment by providing an internet connection in this village area. So I myself, I worked in company like Qualcomm, where I made routers, 4G, 5G technology. So I thought, can I solve this problem by building our own product more specific to the villages? Because all the routers built for the enterprise or home customer, with one assumption, they have a very stable broadband internet. This is the one assumption they made and building the router. And router's functionality is just routing and provide a Wi-Fi connection or internet connection. It won't do beyond that. But here I need to deploy decentralized router, should be maintenance free and self-configurable, self-diagnose. If any issue in the router, it should figure out itself and solve the problem. So what I did is I added a more computing power in the existing router. So we started building our own customized router. Now the router is act as more powerful than your normal home router. And the interesting thing is I deploy this router to all the pregnant mother home, where I put a solar panel and deploy the router in the home in a different pregnant mother home. This router nicely create a mesh network between all the nodes in the region. So there is a public Wi-Fi available in the villages. By creating a multiple mesh network, one point where there is a broadband or a 4G connection, I will just connect that node. The interesting thing is our algorithm, it's called auto mesh. That is the algorithm we are using. It seamlessly create a routing table. It connect all the nodes in that, and this internet will be shared to everyone. And another point is sometimes there is a bandwidth issue. This can offlinely store all the data, especially in the villages. Night time, you will get more bandwidth. Morning time, the bandwidth will be less. So our algorithm is very smart. What it will do is it will gather all the offline data and store it into the node. Whenever the bandwidth is very stable, it starts pushing on one shot. So one shot, it will push all the data to the cloud network. So this really helps us to deploy into deeper villages. And now, especially, we found most of the manufacturers. So we now the second part is how we can make it self-sustainable. You can't charge the end customer for the internet. They're ready to pay for a healthcare. So the model we find is every villages has a lot of manufacturing facilities. Okay, big companies set up their manufacturing facilities in that villages. So we come up with them. We modified the solution for those manufacturing facility to monitor their manufacturing facility for automation. Now we enable that manufacturer to pay for the services, and through that model we could able to provide a connectivity in the village area. So we will bring a broadband connection up to the manufacturing facility, and from there the Wi-Fi node will connected seamlessly to the villages. So this is a model we are following and deploying.
Who pays for the bandwidth though? I mean, you mentioned earlier if there's the 4G connection, for instance, and it could share throughout the network. But then who pays for that 4G connection? Essentially, backhaul.
That's why I told about the manufacturing facility. See, for their facility, they are paying for the bandwidth.
Okay, so you're just piggybacking off them. I mean, you're not.
Yeah.
The villagers are not paying as such. It's the money, the facility that is paying. Okay, so that is one. Another quick question I have for you, Senthil, is so what's the rough cost of your router? Because it certainly sounds like a very interesting device. So what sort of retail price is that?
So currently we are charging 10,000 rupees for this router. Based on the location geographic, you might buy 2 or 3 routers to create a mesh.
Right. So that's what, roughly $200, right?
Less than $200.
Yeah, less than 200. Okay. And so and it's powered by normal 240 AC, or how is that powered? Or by solar?
Yeah, it is it is powered by solar, and it has a battery attached. So, and then the power cable also we provide. So it can 3 options like solar or through electric or battery.
Okay. So we'll just take a short pause here. I see there's one question in the Q&A. If people from the audience have any other questions, please do put it in the Q&A, because we will come to those questions shortly, as well as a couple of other questions I have for my panelists as well. But at this moment, what we'll do, we'll play the little interview we did with Peter Bloom. As I said before, he couldn't join the live session due to timing issues, the time zone he is in. And what we asked him was, what were some of the learnings that Rhizomatica had in terms of how they've been deploying community networks in Mexico and elsewhere. So if I can just ask my team to play that video now, and then we'll come back to our panelists again for the Q&A and a bit more of discussion.
I think it's important that people engage with the technology somehow. I don't think they should be engaging with it all of their time and it should take up all of their free time. But I think this idea that we just press a button and everything works can also be somehow disempowering. And I think that is kind of the model of internet that we have now. And that model is somehow problematic. Where everything just kind of is easy and you don't need to understand how it works. And I think us not understanding how it works can also lead to some kind of bad outcomes. I think we're seeing the effects of this sort of push button technology in the urban world, and that's not always, I think, what we want. So I think there needs to be a middle ground. I think it has to be something that people can do from the set of skills that they have. And certainly, I mean, you guys have the same experience somehow. You can do it. It is possible to train people who aren't literate to set up an internet network. It's not like it can't be done. It can be done. And I think the engagement with the technology helps people gain a different kind of literacy around the technology. And I think that literacy is crucial for people to get the most out of the technology and the most out of it in the sense of the best parts of it, and also hopefully have a better and more critical understanding of the possible dangers of the technology or negative possibilities that the technology presents. And I would also say that Rhizomatica, we don't only work with internet technologies. We try to look at this idea of community networks from a communication standpoint. So if you look at most of the networks that we actually build, they use internet, but they usually are using internet to deliver other services, not just internet connectivity itself. So we built a huge cellular network, most of which is a voice network. We're also working in Brazil and here in Ecuador, where I am actually at this very moment, on using sort of a hybrid, using internet technologies to make HF or shortwave radio able to pass digital information over very, very long distances for isolated communities in the Amazon. So our take on it isn't so much our job is to get people access to the internet. We feel that our job is to help people communicate in the ways that help them build their autonomy, defend their territory, and kind of organize themselves for a nice and good life. You know? And sometimes that includes the internet and sometimes it doesn't. But I certainly agree with the statement, which is that the only way or the best way, you said, to sort of contextualize is to have people being engaged at every part of the process. And if we don't do that, then yes, we are just essentially extending a consumer model, or even what I think of as a circuit of capitalist accumulation into areas that have somehow been not been part of that. And I wonder kind of what our role is as people who are promoting these technologies is to make sure that we do that responsibly, and we do that in ways that people can actually get what they want out of the technology. We've tried to build networks that are very aligned with the ways that people live and the ways that people inhabit their territory and the ways that people organize, and kind of depending on that. So for example, the folks that we work with deep in the Amazon rainforest, there's no really good way or affordable way to get backhaul there, to get even a satellite connection. And furthermore, it's very important to us that people are able to support their networks themselves, that it isn't relying on injections of cash from outside. So it's really important for us that people locally can support their own network. So how do you build a network in a place where people don't have money, where there's no money? They can't exchange money for a service. That's why we use something like digital shortwave, because there's no service provider. We're just bouncing the signal off the ionosphere, and it can go 800, 1,000, 1,500 kilometers, which is amazing. And we don't have to pay anybody to do that. So for the community, as long as they're able to kind of maintain the equipment, there's not a monthly service that they're having to pay to somebody. So that's that experience. That's why we went in that direction there. In Mexico, it's been a kind of a different story somehow. When we started there, people were just interested in talking. They were interested in keeping their communities together. Lots of people had migrated out of the communities to the US or other parts of Mexico, and people just wanted to be in touch. So we basically built a huge voice network. And kind of the idea there was to make it a federated network. So each community owns and operates its own network, but they come together, they organize together for different goals. So some of those are regulatory goals. So all of these networks got built, and then they had to kind of legalize their networks, and we felt that was easier to do together. Same with, they sort of share a technical team that helps with maintenance. So it's not just one community, but 20 communities help all together pay the salaries and the rent and everything of the organization that kind of helps keep all of their networks going. So they share the costs. So very different experiences based on local realities.
And so we had one question from the Q&A, and John Brewer is asking, has any operator anywhere in the world created a sustainable TV whitespace network of more than 50 subscriber units? So I have, I would ask a similarly skeptical question as well on that, because, from what I've seen, it's largely been experimental. But maybe Ritu, you may have come across someone who's actually running a larger TV whitespace network. Do you have any input on that?
Yes, previously in IIT Bombay, in India, was running a Grammag, was running a experimental project, running an experimental project on TV white space. I think they did had a 50 subscriber base units, but due to and they have made a specific device for the TV white space, which was successful as well. However, the TV white space is not licensed in delicensed in India. So that experimental model has been stopped. Maybe in Nigeria, when the TV white space is in the draft, is in the draft policy stage, they may come up with some of the new ways of coming up. Like Fansam Foundation is experimenting on the TV white space as of now in Nigeria.
And do you know how big that network is, the one they're running in Nigeria?
Uh, at a present situation, they do have around 25 villages they have covered up around. However, they are still experimenting on the TV white space alongside with the uh, 2.4 and 2.44 and 5.8 gigahertz uh, gigahertz spectrum frequency actually. So the 25 villages will cover they about more than a 500 households or something like that.
I recall a couple of years ago, there was a flurry of activity around TV white space, including, some large multinationals pushing for that, particularly here in Asia, or Asia Pacific, I should say. Maybe I have not been following it as closely anymore, but my impression is that, that flurry of activity seems to have died down a little bit now. People don't seem to be pushing it all that much anymore. I think licensing is perhaps one of the issues. And I am not yet, again, as I said, I haven't been following this closely, so I'm not sure if actually any jurisdiction, any country has actually de-licensed or licensed, for that matter, TV white space. So I guess, that could be a stumbling block. And of course, there's the cost factor as well, right? As I mentioned earlier, Wi-Fi is so cheap that sometimes it's easier to go. But obviously, TV white space has some potential, particularly with backhaul and all that. Gustav, have you had any experience with TV white space in the stuff you've been doing?
Not yet. I think the use of TV white space spectrum in Indonesia are still in the early stage. There are some experiments about that. And actually, our government regulations and policy allowing people or certain institutions to do such experimentation. But when it comes to scaling up for the mass use, the TV white space spectrum are still in the we haven't got any specific policy and regulations that are working in that field, even though that I think in around 5 years ago, there's some already like some people in the Universitas Indonesia trying to draft regulation on that. And the Ministry of Communication also having a close study on TV white space spectrum, but it haven't done being used for the wide level. So I think radio is one of the most common spectrum that are being used for the wireless network. Actually, we also already discussed with some friends at the Institute Technology of Bandung to do some experimentation on the TV white space, but I think they haven't any attempt to use that technology for the public yet.
Okay. So, I see there's a comment here. Apparently, the Gram Mark project at IIT Bombay had more than 200 subscribers covering 7 villages. So I guess that was a slightly larger deployment of TV white space. Ritu, so another question for you then. The sustainability angle always also comes into play, right? I mean, Gustav mentioned some of the things they've been doing in Indonesia. But what else have you seen? Because, a lot of these networks are initially seed funded by some organization, some sort of aid or development organization. But then there's the issue of operating and maintaining the network and ensuring that it's sustainable into the future, right? How do you see that evolving? And do you see, I don't think there's any one model that works. I think it's probably, it's contextualized to the local community, local environment, and in what models people are using. But maybe if I were to ask you, what are 2 or 3 quick models you could describe on how people are sustaining the networks? Any
Yeah.
comment on that?
Yes, so that's a very good question. Actually, we do as a community network operators, we do tend to permutation combination use different kind of a technology, permutation combination of a set of different sets of models, and we see actually. Uh, Using a low cost routers and using a low cost devices is one of the aspect of using by the community network operators. However, there are different set of models which I have seen around across in Asia Pacific region. One of the model is that, like for instance, DF had established a zero connect model where they had a mobile van which was had a solar panel mobile van which was customized, which had a tower antenna and enabled with the solar panel. It was running in a desert of a Kutch, providing the connectivity to the 40 kilometers in 17 schools, which were made of a jute and shaft actually. So that model was sustainable as per the community need of a Kutch actually. And when they were trying to establish, because yes, it is funded by some of funding agencies, international funding agencies, but looking forward for the sustainability, providing the different sort of a digital services, providing a education based services, providing a different financial inclusion services, maybe some of the segments where these community network operators are also trying to sustain the network. Actually, they may not be a profitable, but the socially and socially viable, definitely they are, and economically viable, they are trying to reach it out to that. Similarly, the if I'm seeing the Tumkur based Janatsu, where they have an offline as well as a online combination of a model. The offline evolves them that the cost of the cost is a very lower down, even though the lower down, but when they need a connectivity, they just allows to go for the connectivity for a 2G or a 3G, or a connectivity of a using different lights, different frequencies, and as per the need of the committee, they go for the on the internet. That balances out that when they need an internet and when they want to be in an offline mode, and which also allows them to specifically play around with the different sort of a, they have a craft space, they have a different kind of they have a radio station programs, and which allows them to bring the different kind of a local content, different sort of a leveraging the local content and the culture things, making the at least making them socially and economically viable on that segment. Hub and spoke model by another by a DF, which I am talking about, is having a one prime center and then connecting to the different villages, are also the sum of sort of a economic sustainable model. uh, G, Maybe the Peter's example of a GSMA network in a Rhizomatica, and what they have experimented in Mexico as well, is something that is something that models which are allowing different sort of a permutation combination, not only with the technology, but also seeing with different sort of a economic and social models they are testing out. We can have a technology is a one aspect, but we can also have a different aspect of a business models and sustainable models, which we are bringing up to those uh, things.
So, it's interesting because you've mentioned a couple of times now online and offline. And Santil also mentioned when he was describing his technology that how, it is able to store the data that the system is working on, and then, of course, uploading it when bandwidth is back. In discussions I've been having with other people, there's been this big question about, if a community network is not connected to the live internet, is it actually a network? So how would you respond to that? I mean, is there a case to be made for offline and online and, store and forward, or however else you want to call it? Because some people seem to have very different views on that. Yeah.
Yes, I do agree, but I remember I was working with DEF, and I have seen the network in a Baran location, which was connecting the main location with the 7 villages out of it. And yes, it's important to understand the community network aspect from the community. What do they need and what purpose they need it, and why do they need it? Are they able to preserve their culture? Are they able to make their network viable, whether it's a socially viable. And socially viable is more important, because even if the funding is given and the funding is gone by after 1 year, but are they able, the committee is able to run that network? That's the most important aspect for it. So if a network, if my backhaul is not working and still I'm able to communicate with the 7 villagers and my neighbors, whether it's there is a in a case of a network shutdown, whether it's in a case of a backhaul is not there, that I feel that that network is a committee, is a network is a committee owned network. Because I was able to see during the time of a Baran that the 7 villages were connected and the 7 schools were connected. Students were happy when they were able to talk to the another school students itself. With having that kind of a video conferencing call in an offline method, it's for them, it's a means of a communication, it's a means of a communication. Similarly, that also applies to the as a community, how do I see the network, whether I do really do want the offline or online, and it's as per my choice whether I really want to be on the that particular domain actually. So that's something, it's a debatable question, but yes, I believe that it's also depends upon the committee choice. Whether if I don't have a backhaul, that does not mean that I should not be able to communicate. I should be able to communicate, and that's the thing is flowing around as well.
Yeah, I largely agree with what you've said. I think we need to contextualize community networks, right? I think sometimes, people get a bit carried away, assuming this is what a community needs and what they want. You can't boilerplate some of these things. For example, the stuff Gustav has been doing in some of his indigenous communities. The example Santos gave earlier about, a very specific application he was trying to address when he developed his system. So I think having that slightly more open approach to this would be good. Any other questions or comments from our participants? We've had, one very good question by John, but anyone else with some other questions?
May I pitch in?
Yes, Osama.
Yeah, the one very important question that I was wondering, because here, you are there as a moderator who has been funding and supporting many networks. Gustav is the one who is a practitioner on the ground. Senthil is somebody who has invented, who has implied, and also private sector. And Ritu has been part of implementation as well as researcher. So I just want to ask one thing, and I'm sure there are many listeners, is that why we are unable to scale up at a large scale various experiments of community networks? Why does it not get adapted? And you can also, Rajneesh, I would be happy to hear if you can also pitch in this one to,
I think that's a good question. I've been so full, so let me try and provide some comments on this. I think fundamentally it goes down to a question of money, because to build out these networks, money is needed, right? Yes, there are a number of organizations which provide funding, but the funding is not infinite. If you look at the number and amount of people and locations that need to be connected, that is nearly infinite. Okay, it's not infinite, it's roughly half the world, right? Half the global population, or just under half. And what we also see is that a lot of these funding organizations obviously have their own priorities in what is it they want to achieve with the money they have. If we were to connect everyone everywhere, I haven't done the sums. I don't know what that would cost, but definitely I can say we don't have that much money, if we pool all the organizations' money together. Now, when we started off doing this, so I started off this, I've been involved in community networks personally for 15 odd years. But about 12 years ago, we started this Wireless for Communities program in India originally, with DAF, of course, with the organization Osama. And the idea was, of course, to try and, it was more an experiment than anything else. Now, back in those days, no one was talking about community networks. Yes, they did exist. Some people were running them in places around the world, but not in the manner we now look at them, And our idea was very simple, let's just connect the village and see what happens. There was no, we didn't try and over-engineer things. Neither did we try and, go too policy heavy on it. And that experiment worked well. And as I mentioned in the opening, that we've now had over 100, 150 locations that we've either done or inspired across South Asia. So we know the model itself works. Scaling has always been a problem. But it's not just the funding, I think. There's also the capacity within communities to be able to deal with the networks. You can't keep on depending on an external party to come and fix all your problems, right? So it's very critical that we train the local community to do that. Then another component is that it needs to be sustainable, right? There needs to be some sort of revenue stream that is coming in, so that for operations and maintenance costs, but as well to grow the network, right? To replace equipment when time comes. So I think there's multiple parts to the problem. One thing I do fail to see, there's lots of conversations happening around community networks. We seem to talk a lot about funding models and partnerships and things like that. But we don't get to the crux of the issue, is that, why are we not able to scale and amplify the work as quickly as we should be able to? Because I probably answering your question by asking a question in return, but maybe I should stop there. Maybe Gustav, do you have some thoughts on that? On Osama's question?
I kind of agree with you, Raj. Like, but we are very happy. Like in the past couple of years here in Indonesia, there are growing interest on how people can develop and establish their own community networks in their own respective region. Last month, we organized a rural ICT camp in Ciptagelaru village, and we have around 600 participants from different parts of Indonesia. And we also invite some colleagues from the government, in particular to the Ministry of Village Developments and the Ministry of Communication. Even in ministerial level, they started to looking at the community network as a particular model that can help them to penetrate the rural connectivity. Because as you probably noticed, that the big telecommunication companies are a bit reluctant to invest such infrastructure in rural areas and remote places. And community networks models is one of the options that are somehow already there on their table. And in our government level, there is also a different model how they can do that. And as is already mentioned by Ritu, for example, it is also needed a business model and a revenue stream to make the local connectivity work and sustain. And of course, like you also mentioned, there are some technicality aspects that are strongly embedded to it. So knowledge transfer, trainings, workshop is very essential to do that, because I think now we are also trying to set up new models because we already work the indigenous community, and here in Indonesia we have a different group of community who have a different background and different situations. So there are no particular one model for all. We have to test out different models, because I think in terms of technology, the option is already there, but how it's operate in social level, it needs a certain social engineering process, and sometimes it can take quite long process. But we are very lucky. We are being located in the right ecosystem. There are a lot of friends who are helping us in setting up community network project here in Indonesia, together with the ICT Watch and other friends from the ICT volunteer. And I think this growing interest also needed to be channeling, needed to be support. So now our government also trying to make some kind of prototypes, because as you mentioned earlier, during the COVID-19 pandemic situation, the internet connectivity and digital platform is one of the way how we can keep things keep on running. And now I think there's some increasing interest and necessity, and then yeah, we need to show many different models that can be applied and developed by different community.
So the other thing that there's an increasing push for is to be able to use universal service funds or USO funds to help deploy these sort of networks. But obviously, there's also licensing issues that come into play in a lot of jurisdictions as well. Senthil, so let me come to you. With Osama's question about scaling things up. So, I mean, you've been doing. Obviously, you had a very specific application that you were trying to solve the problem for. But how do you scale up? I mean, it sounds to me, I mean, I haven't played with your router, but it sounds to me that it seems to be a very interesting device. One question before I get you to answer though, are you using Wi-Fi with that as well, or are you using something else to connect between the access points? So that's the first question. And the second question is about scaling up. How do you take it bigger beyond the village? How do you connect 100 villages with similar technology?
So currently it is a Wi-Fi powered device, and it can operate on multi-bandwidth, like 2.5 multi-bandwidth. The scaling up aspect of it, actually why we have started with the healthcare, I will tell. See, in a village people, I'm not giving free because if I give everything free, I can't sustain, I can't scale. So I'm charging them in a minimal amount. So especially I started with the pregnancy. The reason is every government is giving almost 10,000 rupees per pregnant mother in the village. Okay. And most of the pregnant mother really don't know there is a scheme I can access, I can get money. So as a company, what we are doing is we are enabling them to understand, hey, there is a scheme. Okay, I ensure the care. Okay, you get the money from the government. From that money, you pay for me. So this is a model we built in this villages. So you pay 1,000 rupees per the entire care. I'm enabling you to get the 10,000 rupees government money. So the thing is, we started with the healthcare so that it can be sustainable and commercial. But now we are expanding to like education and all other sector, so that what really useful for the village people. Village people don't pay for internet. Okay, if I say I give an internet to you, will you pay for me? They don't do it. Okay, but they will pay for a services. That service, sir, primary can be a healthcare, second priority is education, and third is if I enable them in the livelihoods, like by selling their product online, something like they will be ready to pay for the services. To make further sustainability, I am partnering with a manufacturing facility because to bring a broadband connection to the village, it is expensive. You have to put a towers, and so someone has to bear me the money. So the manufacturer facilitator is ready to bear that money. Hey, I'm in the village surrounded by 28 villages in my region. Okay, he is ready to buy my component, purchase all the bandwidth, everything. Once I bring a brand point-to-point connectivity to that area, then from there deploying the node will be very easier for me because it's completely wireless. Even though the manufacturer really don't know that the point is shared with everyone. So that model we are building. What is the challenge in the scalability is, so we are operating in a very lean model because we have to prove that village people will pay if we give a meaningful services to them. So it takes time, like to build a self-sustainable model and get the revenue profit and again deploy back to the system. It's taking time. But what we are believing is once we are able to solve the small issues and financial aspect, this can be replicable to thousands of villages. Because we are every new places, there is a new challenge in India. In India, every new villages you go, there is a cultural innovation you have to do and completely different. Whatever I do in Tamil Nadu, I can do it in Maharashtra. So what we are choosing is the deployment itself. We choose different part of the country, do the piloting and ensure that the model can be replicated. Might be after 2 to 3 years of time frame with a proper funding, this can be deployed not only in India, I say like Indonesia or South American countries, because the model is same. It can be seamlessly deployed across the world.
So one question with the villages that you are working on, I mean, you talked about sustainability and trying to get villages to pay. What we also hear in the news, of course, is that, companies like Jio are rapidly increasing their mobile coverage. So if people have, so first question, I suppose, in the villages that you're working on, is there mobile coverage? And if people will eventually either buy a smartphone or subscribe to a package, what impact would that have on any network rollout that you or others may be trying to do?
Yeah. So the places where we are right now deployed, there is no Jio network. The important thing I want to tell, Jio is saying I am providing internet, but I am saying I am providing healthcare. I don't say I am providing internet. Okay, Geo say I'm providing internet where you can watch YouTube, you can watch Facebook. But I am saying I'm providing internet where you can talk to the doctor. Your son or daughter can connect to the good institution in a education model. So my value proposition is completely different from Geo. And even though we are talking to Geo also, wherever we already deployed our Wi-Fi network, they are thinking that can I use your infrastructure? I don't want to put a tower, all those things. Can I use your infrastructure to provide a connectivity? Because it is cheaper to give an internet in the Wi-Fi rather than the 4G tower and base station. And the problem I told, right? They are all using Huawei, like all Cisco chipset, which need an expert network engineer to do maintenance. But my model is maintenance free, because you can't send you 10 times. If you send your engineer from a main headquarter to your villages, you already lost that money, your infrastructure and maintenance. You are not making enough revenue from that. That is where we are adding a value to them.
So the other question that pops up in similar sort of circumstances is one of licensing, right? So do you have a license? Do you have an ISP license or something? How are you doing that?
Yeah, currently we have a franchise license.
A franchise license.
Yeah, so with that we are deploying, but later we go for a class B license.
Okay. So Ritu, we're nearly at the end of the session now. Ritu, since we start talking about licensing, and Gustav also mentioned that in one of his earlier interventions. If I were to ask you, from a licensing perspective, what is the biggest barrier, particularly when it comes to scaling up community networks? Because I mentioned capacity building, I mentioned finance and a few other things, but there's also the licensing issue, isn't there?
Absolutely, yes. Licensing is the biggest issue. Like a country like India, like where the license fees is yet lower down, but it is not viable for a small network operators to buy the license and operate in that circumstances. Like I am working with Senthil and to talk about the different kind of licensing modes. We are still figuring it out that whether we should go for a Class C license or a Class B license. Having said that point, licensing is one of the major issue. Spectrum, delicensing of a more spectrum is required. Delicensing of a number of a spectrum which is required right now is required to be delicensed. It's in a talks, but who knows what is going to happen in India. Another issue is that when you get the license, regulation fees itself is a high cost. Actually, maintenance of the network with respect to the as a being an ISP is a high cost in India. 8% of AGR to be paid by a small network operator, those who are running in a 5 villages or maximum 10 villages or something like that. It is a huge cost for the network operator. So these are some of the regulations binding, and these are some of the regulations binding which are in terms of a license. It's a cost effective for a small level of a network operator or a small level of a local operators. Then they definitely will be rely on certain things of a as a small level of as a franchisee model. However, now in India as well, that when the franchisee model is also breaking down as the Geo has come up, the franchisee model that the BSNL and the top traditional big operators have stopped giving the backhaul to the small operators. Until unless we are not have a license, they are not giving us a backhaul for a. If we are purchasing a backhaul in a small quantity like 100 Mbps, absolutely fine. But if we are purchasing a backhaul in a 512 Mbps or more than that, it's a difficult for a small network operator to operate in that senses. So these are some of the implications which really in a licensing, and bearing the licensing process, maintaining that all those compliances for a small network operator, it is a challenging. So there's a need to be de-license more spectrum, which is one way of a solution, so that community network operators can come on a frequent mode of using those things. As well as there's a requirement that uh, that licensing process should be very simplistic and very user friendly. In I have seen in India, it's not user friendly. Anyone who has been working in this space, they have to go typically. It's a scenario of a clerk and kind of that model, which is still running in India. Uh, there are other challenges as well. Beyond the licensing challenge, there are challenges of uh, bureaucratic challenges are there, still exist. So those are some of the challenges which exist in this kind of a system.
So it
I would
would,
like I want to ask one of the answer the previous question, that the scalability and the sustainability portion will come if if community network operators are not seen by only by a limited number of people, those who are CSOs or are passionate about community network network providers, but it has to be seen by a private network owners, like what Senthil has said, that Geo is coming to own their infrastructure, to utilize their infrastructure. If that kind of a model can come up, that private operators see not as a small level operators, but they see that we are in a compatible to them, and we are in a alignment to them, and able to provide the last mile connectivity where they cannot reach it. That's something is required to be coming on that for a scalability purpose.
So yes, I mean, it does sound to me that like that, there is a need, when we start talking about what models work and what some of the learnings are. One clear learning that I can see across countries and across regions is one of the licensing aspects, and particularly being able to have a particular licensing class which would allow such networks to flourish and have access to the backhaul as well. And I do believe some countries, I think perhaps in Latin America, one of the countries has actually introduced a license class, if I remember correctly. So, okay, we're at the end of the session. Gustav, if I were to say to you to tweet your closing comment, so that means 280 characters, what would it be? What's your last comment for this session?
Referring to to my conversation with Ono Purbo, one of the internet, the father of internet in Indonesia, in order to scaling up the community network or the internet of people, actually there are three ways: power, money, and masses. Actually, we need to make smart people, because power and money is not belong to the masses. We need to encourage movements. We need to encourage people. We need to make people more smart, so they can initiate their own community network and fulfilling their needs to have internet connectivity. So that is what we are trying to work right now, that how we can scale up our initiative by working with as much as people who have same passion and same interest. And we work with knowledge, we work with channeling information. We need to scale up the skill. So the interest in growing the community network can somehow well develop in the future.
Okay, thank you. Senthil, closing comment from you, quick one.
So developing country like India need more on cultural innovation, and that to adapt the people. So just building a technology and pushing to them, it won't work. Like I can give an internet just like that, it won't work. It should be more on related to the culture and increase their livelihood.
Okay, thanks. Ritu, last comment from you.
I think that if we are providing the connectivity and combining with the different sort of a models, whether it's a technology or whether it's a different sort of a sustainability or models, that is the requirement for the community purpose actually. So according to me, that this other things are absolutely fine, but until unless we are not testing out the different permutation of models, we will not be able to test for the bed as well.
Okay, thanks very much. So I will just make a very short comment, and that is, community networks is all about empowering people, and particularly the hardest to connect, for them to have the digital opportunities that, could literally transform their lives overnight. So, the more we can work at it, the more, this sort of knowledge exchange and ideas exchange is great. But I also hope that, people take it forward as well. And, obviously getting into the ears of policymakers and regulators is a key thing. Of course, we have a whole session dedicated to policy and regulation in a couple of days' time. So I'm hoping some of these points will come up there as well. So I would just like to thank my three panelists. Much appreciate your time and your contribution to the session today. And of course, our first ever virtual CNX. We had a few hiccups with the videos and all that, but that's okay. We'll soldier on. So with that, thanks very much. Now we have a break for the next 12 minutes, and then we'll start with session 2. And now if my friends from my team are able to get the videos playing, we'll actually play those videos. If not, you'll just see a screen with the CNX logo on it. So thank you very much for everyone who attended the session today. Please do stay on. We have a great session, which my good friend Osama will moderate after this, which will go into different aspects of community networks, particularly in how they relate to everyday life, including, democracy and citizenship rights and so on. So with that, thank you very much. And we will see you in, about 11 minutes from now. Thank you.